standard song, a la George Gershwin or Rodgers and Hart. I mean,
picture Los Angeles in 1979. The famous Troubadour Club is alive with energy. Guitars echo through sound checks, drinks clink at the bar, and music legends walk through the halls. Then suddenly chaos breaks out. A young assistant runs into the promoter's office, clearly upset. Linda Ronstadt has just stormed out of the green room again. The reason? A single name on the performance list. Not hers, not the Eagles, but someone else. One look at that name and she was gone. No fight, no questions asked, just a cold exit and complete silence. For years, nobody understood what really happened that night. Linda never explained it. There were no public fights or tabloid stories. She always gave perfectly calm interviews and seemed unshakable. For decades, she kept that silence. But now the silence is broken. And what? Like the end of Second Sight? Like the previous Maiko silence? Why was no... In a rare moment of complete honesty, Linda Ronstadt is finally telling the world about 7 musicians she never forgave. These are the people who hurt her pride, challenged her art, and showed her the darkest side of the music business. This list isn't what you might expect. These aren't small arguments or old grudges that faded away. These are the stories that shaped an entire era of rock and roll. They're about power games, broken trust, and quiet revenge. The most shocking part is that some of the names on this list were once her closest friends. The first person on her list is a drummer who became a superstar. He used her as a stepping stone and then walked all over her. If you think you know who it is, think again. Don Henley was once just Linda's drummer and backup singer. Before the Eagles became rock royalty, he was grateful for the spotlight she gave him. In the early 1970s, Linda Ronstadt was the rising star, selling out theaters from coast to coast. Henley was the quiet guy behind the drums, riding the wave of her fame. She gave him his first big break, but as the Eagles took off, everything changed. Suddenly, Henley wasn't the humble musician anymore. His ego grew right along with the band's success. The group that once opened for Linda now strutted through Sunset Boulevard like they owned the place. Henley, in particular, began acting like the king of the canyon, brushing off the woman who helped launch his career. The breaking point came in 1975, backstage at the Universal Amphitheater. Henley made a comment that still hurts to this day. He mocked Linda's musical direction, saying she should stick to covers and let real songwriters do the talking. The words weren't just insulting, they dismissed everything she had built with determination, heart, and pure talent. Linda didn't just walk out, she took away his tour credentials on the spot. No second chances. Word spread through the industry that Henley's arrogance had gone too far. Friends and roadies quietly spoke of his cocaine-fueled tantrums, his ego-driven decisions, and the cruel comments he'd make behind closed doors. What hurt Linda most wasn't just the betrayal, it was the disrespect. In private, she'd later call him a climber who lost his soul chasing fame. But Henley wasn't the only one who crossed a line. Linda's next feud didn't happen quietly backstage. It played out live in front of an audience, complete with a drunken frontman, a stolen microphone, and a moment of public humiliation so bad she never forgave it. Charles Henley, Linda, the moment that she turned it all into something better. It was 1968. The summer of love had passed, but the chaos hadn't. The Doors were electric, burning through every stage they touched. Linda Ronstadt was still fighting tooth and nail to carve out her place in a male-dominated industry. That night at a private after-party near the Whiskey A Go-Go, legends and misfits mixed freely. But no one expected what happened when Jim Morrison spotted Linda. Well, he was already several drinks in, shirt half unbuttoned, swaggering through the crowd. In the middle of a performance, in a moment of equal parts madness and ego, Morrison pulled Linda on stage without warning. It wasn't planned, it wasn't cute. It was reckless. Then he leaned in, right in front of everyone, and tried to kiss her. Linda pulled back instinctively. Morrison lost his balance, stumbled into her mic stand, and nearly brought the entire setup crashing down. Gasps, stares, whispers. The crowd didn't know whether to laugh or panic. The moment was never caught on camera, but it became underground legend, passed around backstage and through late-night radio stories for years. Morrison never apologized. In fact, he doubled down. Months later, in a radio interview, he mocked her, calling her sweet but spineless, dismissing her as harmless and forgettable. Linda didn't fight back publicly. She never did. But behind closed doors, her words cut deep. Within her inner circle, she called Morrison a brilliant wreck who poisoned everything around him. To her, he wasn't just a chaotic performer, he was a symbol of the toxic masculinity that tried to dominate every corner of the music world. While Morrison's antics left emotional bruises, the next betrayal wasn't delivered with slurred words or drunken kisses. It came during a moment of unity when Linda thought she was among friends, supporting a cause she believed in, a movement she'd risked her career to support, until one of her so-called allies turned on her. It was 1976. A benefit concert for farm workers had brought together some of the biggest names in rock, including two artists known not just for their voices, but their convictions, Linda Ronstadt and Neil Young. On the surface, they were allies united for a cause they both deeply believed in, but once the spotlight hit, everything changed. Backstage, tensions boiled over when Neil began dismissing Linda's artistic input. He rejected her set suggestions, blocked her from performing certain songs, and even criticized her sound as being too commercial. To make things worse, after the show, he reportedly told the press that she wasn't built for protest. The implication was clear. Linda wasn't authentic enough for the fight. She left the venue in tears. It wasn't just an insult, it was a betrayal from someone she had respected, someone she thought stood for the same values, being painted as hollow by a fellow activist cut deeper than any critic ever could. That night marked a turning point. From that moment on, no matter how noble the cause, Linda never shared a stage with Neil Young again. Behind closed doors, she called him loud in message, cruel in execution. To her, his activism rang hollow when paired with that kind of arrogance. But if that moment shook her personally, the next one would devastate her artistically. Because the next betrayal didn't come from backstage politics or public statements. It came in the middle of a studio session in front of a full room of musicians where Linda was stripped of her confidence with just one chilling line. Their meeting in 1974 had the buzz of something iconic. Frank Zappa, avant-garde, unpredictable, the mad genius of experimental rock. Linda Ronstadt, genre-defying, vocally unstoppable, and on the rise. On paper, it was a collaboration that could have redefined boundaries. Instead, it collapsed in a matter of hours. It started with promise. Linda expressed genuine interest in recording one of Zappa's tracks, but as soon as they stepped into the studio, things went sideways. Zappa dismissed her creative suggestions with a smirk, calling her sound too sanitized. He accused her of trying to water down his music, turning raw art into a jingle fit for car commercials. The tension reached its breaking point during a live rehearsal. In the middle of the session, Zappa stopped the band cold. The room went silent. Then, in front of everyone, he sneered, "This is what happens when you hand real music to a pop singer." The room froze. Linda didn't yell. She didn't argue. She quietly packed up and walked out, humiliated, hurt, and done. She never returned, and she never collaborated with Zappa again. Publicly, she said nothing. But behind the scenes, close friends recall her words clearly. She called Zappa brilliant but brutal. A mind she respected, but a man she could never trust again. Still, creative differences with difficult artists were one thing. But what came next ran deeper. Because the next name on her list wasn't an eccentric genius or a chaotic frontman. It was someone she once called family. A fellow trailblazer who turned on her when it mattered most. But by 1978, that harmony had turned to tension. During a vocal session for a collaborative track, Linda requested a simple key change, one that would better fit her voice. Crosby refused, brushing her off with a dismissive, "You should learn to adapt." What might have been a minor disagreement quickly snowballed. Heated words were exchanged, and their argument didn't stay in the studio. Within days, it had leaked to the press, turning into one of the most whispered-about clashes in the Canyon. But it didn't stop there. Crosby went public in Rolling Stone, calling Linda manufactured, implying she was more product than talent. For Linda, who had built her entire career on raw ability and creative instinct, it was a dagger to the heart. She didn't respond in interviews. She never did, but the silence she maintained was anything but passive. She made a quiet but pointed move. She banned his name from being spoken around her band and inner circle. Studio musicians were told not to bring him up. His music was removed from her tour playlists. It was as if he no longer existed in her world. To Linda, Crosby had betrayed not just a friendship, but a shared ideal of what Laurel Canyon once represented. Him as a warning sign, proof that even the most brilliant minds could be consumed by ego, drugs, and fame. While Crosby's betrayal was personal, the next on her list was something colder, a public jab that turned punk poetry into weaponized cruelty. It was 1979, and Cleveland was buzzing with energy. A major festival had drawn together icons and up-and-comers alike. Linda Ronstadt, fresh off a string of chart-topping albums, was one of the headliners. At the peak of her powers, she was an established force. That night, all eyes were on her, and one of them belonged to Elvis Costello. He was the new kid on the scene, brash, brilliant, barely filtered. Punk rock's intellectual rebel with a chip on his shoulder and something to prove. But no one expected what happened next. In front of a cluster of reporters, Costello sneered, calling Linda's set background music for brunch. It was more than a jab, it was a public humiliation. The comment spread quickly, and when Linda confronted him backstage, hoping for clarity or maybe even an apology, she got something else entirely. Costello, reportedly drunk and arrogant, looked her in the eye, threw another cold insult, and walked off without a word of remorse. Andrew Walsingman looked around for more drinks during the remorse. Linda never looked back. To her, Elvis Costello represented something bigger than just one rude remark. He embodied a new kind of artist, clever but heartless, critical without compassion, not rebellious, just cruel for the sake of it. She saw no soul in his defiance, only ego. Yet even that bitterness couldn't compare to the final heartbreak on her list. Because the last name wasn't a wild rocker or a brash newcomer, it was someone whose music should have harmonized with hers, a voice so compatible it seemed like fate was trying to put them on the same path. But behind the scenes, the clash was undeniable, and what should have been a dream collaboration turned into a silent war. In 1982, it seemed like the perfect collaboration. Paul Simon, one of the most respected songwriters of his time, and Linda Ronstadt, the reigning queen of genre-defying vocals. When she agreed to duet with him for his upcoming album, fans and industry insiders alike buzzed with excitement. On paper, it was a dream. In reality, it was a slow-burning nightmare. From the first rehearsal, things felt off. Simon nitpicked her delivery, interrupting takes to correct phrasing that didn't need fixing. He rewrote lyrics without consulting her and offered vocal advice that felt more like thinly veiled criticism. According to those close to Linda, she later described the experience as feeling like being scolded by a principal. Every note she sang was met with scrutiny, not support. The chemistry never materialized. The creative spark fizzled under the weight of ego and condescension. The song was ultimately shelved, unfinished, unreleased, and unspoken of for years. But for Linda, the damage wasn't about one track. It was about being treated as less than. A voice like hers, a legacy like hers, deserved a partner. Instead, she got a dictator. After that, she made a quiet promise to herself. She would never step into a studio with Paul Simon again. And with that final fracture, Linda Ronstadt's silence on her biggest betrayals had officially unraveled. 7 musicians, 7 scars, all hidden behind decades of elegance, till now. Linda Ronstadt has never been one to feed the gossip machine. For decades, she let the music speak. But these revelations aren't about revenge. They're about truth. She built her legacy not just on talent, but on surviving egos, betrayals, and a ruthless industry. In finally telling these stories, she's not tearing others down, she's lifting a veil. Because sometimes the greatest strength isn't in the songs we sing, but in the silence we choose to break.